Meet Marcus Wright, a visionary entrepreneur determined to bring financial opportunities to those overlooked by the system. But when he faces prejudice from powerful institutions and betrayal from those around him, his path to success becomes a battle for justice and equality. With unexpected allies and mounting obstacles, Marcus must challenge the very system designed to keep him down. Will he break through and create lasting change, or will the barriers prove too much to overcome? Join us to discover Marcus' inspiring journey. If you're excited to see what happens next, like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of perseverance and empowerment. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment. The glass doors of Hamilton Trust Bank glided shut with a soft, almost inaudible thud behind Marcus Wright. The lobby stretched out before him, a cavernous space gleaming with wealth and status. The floors were polished marble, reflecting the golden light from chandeliers that hung like jewels in the air. Abstract art adorned the walls, screaming sophistication and luxury. Marcus paused for a moment, straightening his tailored but modest navy blue suit, aware that it was nearly as flashy or expensive as the attire worn by the other patrons around him. Their glances darted in his direction, curious, perhaps a bit disdainful. He could hear the quiet whispers, those who thought he didn't belong here. Marcus adjusted his tie and reminded himself why he was there. Had earned this. Every dollar in his account was a testament to his hard work, to long hours at jobs that never quite gave him the respect he deserved. He had dreams that stretched far beyond the confines of his day job, a vision to build something meaningful, to lift up not just himself, but others like him. He was here to make a simple deposit, one step closer to realizing that dream. As he made his way to the teller counter, snippets of conversation floated to his ears, sharp laughter, quick exchanges between well-dressed men and women discussing investments, new cars, and upcoming vacations. The room buzzed with privilege. Next, called Troy Campbell, the teller, his voice dripping with artificial cheerfulness. Marcus stepped forward, meeting Troy's gaze. Troy was young, not much older than Marcus, with neatly slicked-back hair and a pristine uniform that gave him an air of importance. His smile never quite reached his eyes. "What can I do for you today?" Troy asked, the politeness in his voice sounding like a veneer, barely masking something else beneath it. "Just a deposit," Marcus replied, sliding a neatly sealed envelope across the counter. He stood tall, projecting the calm confidence he always tried to maintain in places like this. But inside, the familiar gnaw of unease clawed at him. He could feel the unspoken judgment all around him, the silent assumption that he didn't belong. Troy picked up the envelope, his smile faltering as he opened it. His eyes flicked over the amount, and a flash of disdain crossed his face, just for a moment, but long enough for Marcus to notice. He raised an eyebrow, looking at Marcus with something close to amusement. "Is this a mistake?" Troy asked, his voice barely hiding the condescension. Marcus felt a surge of heat rise up his neck. His pulse quickened, but he kept his voice level. "No, it's what I have for now, but it's a start." Troy chuckled, shaking his head as if Marcus had said something utterly naive. "You sure you're in the right place?" Troy leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "This bank caters to a certain clientele, you know. Maybe you'd be better off at a credit union." The laughter in Troy's voice stung. Marcus clenched his jaw, biting back the retort he wanted to spit out. He knew he had no reason to feel embarrassed, but the weight of the other client's stares pressed on him, suffocating. He forced himself to sign the receipt Troy slid across the counter, his hand trembling slightly as he did so. "Have a nice day," Troy called out mockingly as Marcus turned to leave, his laughter echoing in Marcus's ears. It wasn't the first time Marcus had felt this kind of treatment, but it didn't make it any easier to swallow. Outside the bank, the cool air hit him like a slap. Marcus stopped on the sidewalk, clenching his fists by his sides as the burning humiliation washed over him. The world around him seemed both vast and claustrophobic, full of endless possibilities, but also peppered with obstacles designed to keep people like him in their place. "I won't let this define me," Marcus murmured under his breath. He had dreams, and this was just another bump in the road. One day, He would be the one sitting in those high-rise offices, not because he conformed to their expectations, but because he had built something greater, something that could stand on its own. With a deep breath, he pushed forward, walking away from the imposing building of Hamilton Trust Bank. Change was coming, and Marcus knew he would be at the forefront of that transformation. Marcus sat in the dimly lit office of Pioneer Community Bank, the smell of stale coffee and old wood filling the air. This bank was a far cry from the imposing opulence of Hamilton Trust. The walls were lined with faded photographs of past bank presidents, their stern faces watching over the office like sentinels. The bank itself felt tired, worn down by years of steady, uninspired work. Marcus was young, barely 32, and full of ambition. He had spent months refining his business plan, dreaming of the day when he could break free from the cycle of poverty that had gripped his family for generations. Today was supposed to be the day he secured the loan to launch his first investment venture, a step toward building a legacy, not just for himself, but for others who had been overlooked by the traditional financial system. He approached the teller's desk, where a middle-aged woman with weary eyes sat tapping nervously on her calculator. Linda Parker, the loan officer, looked up as Marcus cleared his throat. "Good morning, Mom. I'd like to discuss a loan application." Linda's brow furrowed as she glanced at Marcus. Her skepticism was palpable, the same look Marcus had grown accustomed to over the years. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone suggesting that she didn't believe a young man like Marcus, let alone a young black man, could have anything of real value to discuss. "I don't," Marcus replied, pulling out a well-prepared folder filled with business plans and financial projections. "But I have everything I need right here. I'm looking to open a small investment firm, and I believe there's a significant market for it in our community." Linda glanced at the folder, then back at Marcus, her expression unchanged. She sighed and flipped through the paperwork with disinterest. "He'll need to check with my supervisor." She disappeared into a back office, and Marcus waited, his heart pounding in his chest. He had worked tirelessly to get to this point, saving every penny he could, researching the market, and perfecting his pitch. He knew that what he was proposing could change lives, not just his own. A few moments later, Linda returned, followed by David Miller, the bank's senior loan officer. David, an older man with a perfectly pressed suit and a demeanor that exuded authority, looked down at Marcus with barely concealed disinterest. "What's this about?" David asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who believed they already knew the answer. Marcus stood tall, summoning his confidence. "I'm here to apply for a loan to start a small investment firm," he said, handing over his business plan. "I believe I have a solid plan to serve our community while also generating a profit." David flipped through the folder, his expression growing more condescending with each page he turned. After a few moments, he closed the folder and looked at Marcus with a raised eyebrow. "You're aware, aren't you, that most loans are given to those with established credit?" Marcus bristled. He had heard this line before, but he wasn't about to let it go unchallenged. "My credit is fine. I've worked hard to get to where I am. I've saved every penny from my job, and I believe I have a chance to make something of myself." David leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You need to understand that banks don't just hand out loans based on dreams. We need guarantees. Can you offer collateral?" Marcus' heart sank. Collateral? He didn't have any property to put up, no family inheritance to fall back on. The weight of the system pressed down on him, making him acutely aware of the invisible barriers that separated him from the success he was so close to grasping. "I don't have collateral," Marcus admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I have a vision," David scoffed, waving Marcus off. "Vision doesn't pay the bills. I'm afraid we can't help you." Marcus stood there, frozen for a moment, the rejection stinging more than he had expected. It wasn't just the rejection itself, it was the way it had been delivered, as if his entire existence, his dreams, were nothing more than an inconvenience to be brushed aside. As he left the bank, the bright sunlight outside felt like a cruel contrast to the darkness he felt inside. He had always known that the road to success wouldn't be easy, but the harsh reality of systemic obstacles was more crushing than he had imagined. As Marcus stood on the sidewalk outside Pioneer Community Bank, staring at the bustling streets of his neighborhood, a familiar voice cut through the fog of his despair. Marcus Wright, looking troubled.
"What's going on, son?"
Marcus turned to see Mr. Johnson, a well-respected elder in the community. Mr. Johnson had always been a source of wisdom and guidance for the younger generation, having run a successful small business for decades before retiring. He was known for his kind face and warm smile, and today was no different. Marcus sighed, shaking his head. I just applied for a loan, but they wouldn't even consider it. It was all about my background, my lack of collateral. They didn't even really look at my plan. Mr. Johnson placed a reassuring hand on Marcus' shoulder, his gaze steady and understanding. I've been there, Marcus. The system doesn't make it easy for people like us. But you can't let that stop you. Marcus hesitated, the weight of his recent failure still pressing heavily on him. I don't know, Mr. Johnson. It feels like every door I try to open gets slammed in my face. How am I supposed to break through if no one will give me a chance? Mr. Johnson smiled softly, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of someone who had seen it all. It's not just about money, Marcus. It's about understanding the rules of the game and playing them to your advantage. Let me help you navigate these waters. The offer hung in the air, and for the first time in hours, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. He had been trying to fight this battle alone, but maybe that was his mistake. Mr. Johnson had been where Marcus was now, and if anyone could help him find a way forward, it was him. Together, they walked to a nearby cafe, settling into a quiet corner where Mr. Johnson began to share his own story. I didn't have much when I started out either, he said, sipping his coffee. But what I did have was determination and a willingness to learn. You've got that too. Now, you just need the right tools. Over the next hour, Mr. Johnson outlined strategies for navigating the financial world, how to approach potential investors, how to present a plan in a way that would make people listen. He talked about market trends, investment strategies, and how to network in circles that weren't always welcoming. Marcus listened intently, hanging on to every word. With each new piece of advice, he felt his confidence returning. Maybe the system was built against him, but that didn't mean he couldn't find a way through. You've got the drive, Marcus, Mr. Johnson said as they left the cafe. Now it's time to turn that drive into action. It'll help you, but you need to be ready to work harder than you've ever worked before. I'm ready, Marcus said, a new sense of purpose igniting within him. He was done feeling defeated. This was just the beginning. Under Mr. Johnson's guidance, Marcus threw himself into learning everything he could about finance and the investment world. He spent long hours in the library and online, poring over market trends, studying investment strategies, and analyzing case studies of successful entrepreneurs. Every spare moment was dedicated to building his knowledge, and the more he learned, the more confident he became that his dream was not only possible, was achievable. Mr. Johnson introduced him to a small but tight-knit group of business owners in the community who shared Marcus' vision of empowering underrepresented entrepreneurs. Monica Rodriguez, a tech startup founder, became one of Marcus' closest allies. She had faced her own share of hurdles breaking into the male-dominated tech world, and her advice was invaluable. There's no one way to do this, Monica told him one evening over coffee. But one thing I've learned is that people invest in you just as much as they invest in your idea. You have to show them who you are, your passion, your resilience. That's what's going to make people believe in you. With each new connection, Marcus' network grew. He was no longer the outsider wandering through the intimidating lobbies of elite banks. Instead, he was becoming a part of a movement, one that believed in leveling the playing field for people like him. Mr. Johnson took Marcus to business conferences, introducing him to potential investors and showing him how to pitch his vision with precision and confidence. Together, they refined Marcus' business plan, sharpening every aspect until it was airtight. This is more than just a business, Marcus, Mr. Johnson told him one day. It's a way to change lives. Don't lose sight of that. People are going to challenge you some because they don't believe in you, and others because they don't want you to succeed. But you keep pushing. Marcus nodded, feeling a surge of determination. Every setback, every closed door had been leading him to this moment. He was ready to take the next step. Several months passed, and Marcus' name was starting to make its way into the conversations of local business owners and investors. His perseverance was paying off, but with that attention came a new level of scrutiny, especially from people like Troy Campbell, who had not forgotten their previous encounter at Hamilton Trust Bank. One evening, Marcus attended a networking event hosted by a prestigious finance association. He had been invited as a guest of Mr. Johnson, who saw it as an opportunity for Marcus to mingle with potential investors. The room was full of the city's elite bankers, venture capitalists, and high-powered executives. As Marcus sipped his drink, he caught sight of Troy across the room, chatting with a group of colleagues. The smug smile on Troy's face was unmistakable, and Marcus braced himself for what was to come. Sure enough, Troy made his way over, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Well, if it isn't Marcus Wright," Troy said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What brings you to a place like this? Did you finally decide to join the real world?" Marcus met his gaze, determined not to let Troy's words get under his skin. "I'm here for the same reason everyone else is," he replied coolly. "Business." Troy raised an eyebrow, chuckling as if Marcus had just told a joke. "Business, huh? And what kind of businesses are you running these days, or are you still playing the dreamer?" Before Marcus could respond, one of Troy's colleagues chimed in. Evan Marks, a senior partner at a large venture capital firm, glanced at Marcus with the same air of superiority that Troy wore so effortlessly. "Campbell here tells me you're trying to start an investment firm," Evan said, his tone condescending. "Ambitious, but this game isn't for the faint of heart. Do you even know what you're getting into?" Marcus clenched his jaw, feeling the familiar sting of doubt creeping in. He had spent months building his confidence, but moments like this still hit hard. The world these men lived in, their privilege, their access, was light years away from his own experiences. But Marcus reminded himself why he was here. "I know exactly what I'm getting into," Marcus said, his voice steady. "And I'm not going anywhere." Troy smirked, shaking his head. "You don't get it. Do you guys like you?" He paused, eyeing Marcus' suit, which was a fraction less tailored than the designer labels around him. "You don't belong here. You'll always be on the outside, trying to claw your way in. But you're never going to make it." Marcus felt the heat rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't going to give Troy the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. "People said the same thing to me when I started out," a voice cut through the tension. Marcus turned to see Sarah Mitchell, a young junior analyst at Hamilton Trust Bank, who had been standing nearby, listening to the exchange. She stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Troy. "But here I am." Troy's smirk faltered, and Marcus saw a flicker of discomfort in his expression. "You shouldn't underestimate people, Troy," Sarah continued, her voice firm. "Especially not people like Marcus. He's doing something real, something important. And I wouldn't bet against him." Marcus shot her a grateful look, feeling a swell of appreciation for her support. Troy's face hardened, but he didn't say anything more. He just glared at Marcus before walking away, his shoulders tense with irritation. Sarah turned to Marcus with a warm smile. "I've seen your name around," she said. "You're making waves. Don't let guys like him get to you." "Thanks," Marcus replied, feeling a mix of gratitude and surprise. He hadn't expected anyone in this room to defend him, let alone someone from Hamilton Trust. As the night wore on, Marcus found himself talking to Sarah more. She shared her own frustrations about the elitist culture at the bank, and how difficult it was for people who didn't fit the mold to get ahead. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Marcus," Sarah said as the event wound down. "And I think what you're doing is going to make a real difference. Don't stop." Her words stuck with him, a reminder that even in a world stacked against him, there were people who believed in what he was trying to achieve. Encouraged by the progress he had been making, Marcus and Mr. Johnson decided it was time to move forward with their loan application for the business. They had meticulously prepared the paperwork, gathered all the necessary documents, and refined their pitch. Everything was in place. Now they just needed financial backing. They scheduled a meeting with New Horizons Bank, a mid-sized institution that had a reputation for supporting small businesses. Marcus was cautiously optimistic as he and Mr. Johnson sat down with Megan Hayes, the senior loan officer, and Derek Owens, the bank's finance director. The meeting started well enough. Marcus presented his business plan with clarity and confidence, walking them through his projections and outlining how his firm would focus on socially conscious investments. Mr. Johnson chimed in at key moments, emphasizing their shared vision and experience. But as the meeting went on, Marcus noticed a shift in the tone. Megan's questions became more pointed, her skepticism creeping in. Derek, who had been quietly reviewing the financials, finally spoke up. "This is an interesting proposal, Mr. Right," Derek said, his tone measured. "But I see here that you don't have any significant assets to offer as collateral. That's going to be a problem for us." Marcus' heart sank. He had anticipated this, but hearing it out loud still stung. "I understand," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But what we're offering here isn't just a business, it's an investment in the future. We're targeting an untapped market. The potential is enormous." Derek nodded but didn't seem convinced. "Potential is great, but we need more than that. Without collateral, it's hard for us to justify this kind of risk." Megan folded her hands on the table, looking at Marcus with a sympathetic but firm expression. "We appreciate the work you've put into this, Marcus. But unfortunately, we're going to have to pass on this loan. It's just too high risk without more substantial backing." Marcus felt the rejection like a punch to the gut. He had been so close, he had done everything right. But once again, the system was telling him no. As he and Mr. Johnson walked out of the bank, the familiar feeling of disappointment settled in. But this time, it was tinged with anger. "Don't get discouraged, Marcus," Mr. Johnson said as they stepped into the cool afternoon air. "This is part of the process. We just need to keep pushing." "I'm not discouraged," Marcus replied, his jaw tight. "I'm angry. Every time, it's the same thing. They don't care about the potential, they just care about playing it safe. But we can't play it safe. Not if we're going to change things." Mr. Johnson smiled knowingly. "That fire in your belly, that's what's going to get you where you need to go. Use it." Despite Mr. Johnson's words of encouragement, Marcus couldn't shake the growing frustration that gnawed at him. He had faced setback after setback, and each one felt more personal than the last. He knew the game was rigged, but it didn't make it any easier to keep playing. For the first time in months, Marcus began to doubt himself. The late nights spent working on his business plan, the endless networking, the constant uphill battle, it was all starting to feel like too much. He had been so focused on succeeding that he had barely taken a moment to breathe. His relationships with friends and family were beginning to suffer. He barely had time for anyone, and when he did, he was distracted, his mind always racing with thoughts of the next step, the next hurdle. One evening, after another long day of work, Marcus sat alone in his small apartment, staring blankly at his laptop. The walls felt like they were closing in, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had put so much on the line, and for what? Another rejection, another door slammed in his face. He thought about calling Mr. Johnson, but he didn't want to admit how low he was feeling. Instead, he sat in the quiet, letting the doubt creep in. Maybe Troy was right. Maybe people like him didn't belong in this world. Maybe it was all a pipe dream. But then he remembered Mr. Johnson's words. "That fire in your belly, that's what's going to get you where you need to go." Marcus sat up straighter, taking a deep breath. He wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not after everything he had worked for. He had come too far to turn back. In that moment, Marcus made a promise to himself. He would find another way. He would keep pushing, no matter how many times the system tried to knock him down. After weeks of feeling like he was fighting a losing battle, Marcus finally caught a break. Mr. Johnson had arranged a meeting with Evelyn Stone, a prominent venture capitalist who had built her reputation on socially responsible investing. Evelyn was known for taking chances on people and ideas that other investors overlooked, those who aimed to change the world, not just their bank accounts. The meeting took place in Evelyn's sleek, modern office, high above the city. The atmosphere was quiet but charged, the hum of ambition filling the air. Marcus sat across from Evelyn at a long glass table, trying to keep his nerves in check.
Mr.
Johnson sat beside him, exuding his usual calm confidence. Evelyn listened carefully as Marcus presented his plan, her sharp eyes never leaving him. She asked insightful questions, cutting right to the heart of his proposal, but her demeanor was encouraging. Unlike the other investors Marcus had met, Evelyn seemed genuinely interested in the mission behind his investment firm, not just the numbers. "This is an interesting idea," Evelyn said, leaning back in her chair after Marcus had finished speaking. "You're targeting an underserved market, and there's definitely potential here. But I have to ask, how do you plan to navigate a system that's designed to keep people like you out?" The question hit Marcus hard. It was the exact issue he had been wrestling with for months. But instead of feeling defeated, he felt something else stir inside him: resolve. "That's why I'm doing this," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I've seen firsthand how the system works to shut people out. People with potential, with ideas that could change things. I want to create a firm that doesn't just work within the system, but challenges it. I want to give opportunities to people who don't have access to the kind of capital or connections that others take for granted." Evelyn smiled slightly, but there was a hint of skepticism in her eyes. "I admire your passion, Marcus, but passion alone won't be enough. You'll be up against people who have far more resources and experience than you. How do you plan to compete?" Marcus took a deep breath. He had expected this question, and he was ready for it. "I'm not trying to compete with them. I'm trying to create something different, something that speaks to people's values. Investors are starting to care more about where their money goes, about the impact it has. That's our advantage." Evelyn was silent for a moment, considering his words. "You make a good case," she said finally. "But this is a big risk, especially for someone without a track record. He'll need some time to think about it." Marcus nodded, grateful that she was even considering it. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Stone. I appreciate your honesty." As Marcus and Mr. Johnson left the office, Marcus couldn't help but feel a cautious sense of hope. He hadn't gotten a definitive yes, but it wasn't a no either. And that in itself was progress. "You did well in there, Mr. Johnson said as they walked toward the elevator. "Evelyn's tough, but she respects people who know what they're talking about. She's interested, Marcus. That's more than most people get." Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I just hope it's enough." For a few days, Marcus allowed himself to hope that Evelyn would come through. He continued working with Mr. Johnson, refining his plan, preparing for what could be the breakthrough he had been waiting for. Then the phone call came. It was Evelyn. Her voice was calm but distant, and Marcus could tell something was wrong almost immediately. "Marcus, I've been thinking about our meeting," she began, "and while I think you have a lot of potential, I'm going to have to pass on this investment." Marcus felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "May I ask why?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "There are just too many uncertainties," Evelyn replied. "I've received some additional information about your proposal, and am not confident it's the right fit for my portfolio. I'm sorry." Marcus was speechless. Additional information: he hadn't shared anything beyond what was in his carefully crafted business plan. So what had changed? "Thank you for your time, Miss Stone," Marcus managed to say before ending the call. The moment the call ended, Marcus' mind began racing. Something wasn't right. He knew Evelyn had been seriously considering his proposal. There had to be something else behind her sudden change of heart. That's when he got a text from Sarah Mitchell. "Marcus, I think you should know that Troy's been talking to people about you." Marcus' pulse quickened as he read the message. He immediately called Sarah, who filled him in on the details. Troy Campbell, bitter over Marcus' growing reputation and his own insecurities, had been spreading rumors about Marcus' business, claiming it was too risky, that Marcus didn't have the experience to handle such an ambitious venture. "He's been bad-mouthing you to anyone who'll listen," Sarah said. "I'm sorry, Marcus." I think it might have gotten to Evelyn. Marcus clenched his fists, fury rising in his chest. Troy? Of course it was Troy. The same man who had looked down on him at Hamilton Trust, who had made it clear that he didn't believe Marcus belonged in their world. Now Troy had sabotaged his chance with Evelyn, all out of spite. But as much as the betrayal stung, Marcus knew that getting angry wasn't going to fix things. He had to act. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Hamilton Trust Bank with one goal: confront Troy Campbell. He wasn't going to let Troy's petty sabotage go unanswered. The lobby was just as opulent as it had been the first time Marcus walked in, but this time he didn't feel out of place. He walked with purpose, his anger propelling him forward. He spotted Troy at his usual place behind the teller counter, laughing with a few colleagues. Marcus marched over, his presence immediately silencing their conversation. "Troy," Marcus said, his voice low but firm, "we need to talk." Troy looked up, surprised but not intimidated. "Marcus, what brings you here? Didn't expect to see you back." "I know what you did," Marcus said, ignoring the smug look on Troy's face. "You've been spreading lies about me, about my business. You went behind my back and sabotaged my meeting with Evelyn Stone." Troy's smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his tone dripping with feigned innocence. "Cut the act, Troy," Marcus snapped. "You couldn't stand the thought of me succeeding, so you made sure I wouldn't. But here's the thing: you didn't stop me. You just slowed me down. And that's not going to be enough." Troy's expression hardened, his smirk disappearing. "You think you're better than me, don't you? Just because you have some big dreams, you think you can walk in here and act like you belong? But let me tell you something, you'll never belong. Not here. Not anywhere in this world." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he didn't flinch. He'd heard this before, and he wasn't going to let it break him. "I'm not here to belong, Troy," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I'm here to build something better. And I'm not going to let people like you stop me." Troy scoffed, crossing his arms. "People like me? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means people who are so afraid of losing what little power they have that they tear others down to protect it," Marcus replied. "You can keep trying to block me, but I'm not going to stop. And when I do succeed, it'll be because I didn't let people like you define my worth." Troy was silent, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. But Marcus didn't care. He had said what needed to be said. Without another word, Marcus turned and walked out of the bank, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't gotten the satisfaction of Troy's admission, but it didn't matter. He had made his point, and that was enough. Outside, the crisp air felt invigorating. Marcus knew the road ahead was still full of obstacles, but for the first time in days, he felt like he was back in control. Troy's betrayal had been a setback, but it wasn't going to be the end. As he walked down the street, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Sarah. "I've got some information that might help. Let's meet." Marcus smiled, a flicker of hope igniting inside him. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. And with people like Sarah on his side, he was more determined than ever to see it through. After confronting Troy, Marcus felt a mix of emotions: vindication, frustration, and a nagging doubt that lingered in the back of his mind. As much as he wanted to believe that his words had made a difference, he knew that Troy wouldn't give up easily. People like him rarely did. Marcus walked into his small apartment and collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. The adrenaline from the confrontation had worn off, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. He had fought so hard to get this far, but the constant pushback from banks, from people like Troy, was starting to take its toll. For the first time in months, he felt drained, like his spirit had been worn down to its core. His phone buzzed again, and he saw another message from Sarah Mitchell. "I'm serious, Marcus. I have something that could help." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment before responding with a simple, "Let's meet." Later that evening, they met at a quiet cafe on the edge of the business district. It was a world away from the sleek lobbies and high-rise boardrooms that had become the battleground of Marcus' journey. The soft lighting and cozy booths provided a much-needed refuge from the pressures of the outside world. Sarah was already seated, a determined look on her face, as Marcus slid into the booth across from her. "I've been doing some digging," she began, cutting straight to the point. "There's more going on at Hamilton Trust than what you've seen. The discriminatory practices, the way they treat clients based on their background. It's not just about Troy. It's systemic." Marcus listened intently as Sarah laid out the findings she'd uncovered. As an insider at the bank, She had access to files and internal reports that painted a disturbing picture. Over the years, there had been a clear pattern of bias in how loans were approved, who received investment opportunities, and how clients of color were treated. What Troy had done to Marcus was part of a larger culture that permeated the institution. "I've compiled everything I could find," Sarah continued, sliding a flash drive across the table toward Marcus. "This is all the evidence you need to expose what's really going on at Hamilton Trust. But we need to be careful. If they find out I was involved." Sarah's voice trailed off, and Marcus could see the worry in her eyes. She was risking her career to help him, and the weight of that sacrifice was lost on him. "Sarah, I can't thank you enough for this," Marcus said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I promise I'll be careful. But this could change everything." Sarah nodded, a hint of a smile breaking through her serious expression. "I believe in what you're doing, Marcus. And I believe in you. You've got a chance to make real change. Don't let them take that away from you." As Marcus left the cafe, the flash drive tucked securely in his pocket, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah's information was exactly what he needed to expose the corruption at Hamilton Trust, but it was just about taking down the bank. It was about something bigger. It was about dismantling a system that had held people like him back for far too long. But even with this new lead, doubt lingered. Was this enough? Could he actually take on such a powerful institution and win? The enormity of what lay ahead weighed on him, and for the first time in a long while, he wondered if he was in over his head. The next morning, Marcus sat at his computer staring at the files Sarah had given him. The evidence was damning: internal memos discussing undesirable clients, loan rejections based on race-coded language, and data showing a consistent bias against minority applicants. It was more than enough to cause a scandal, but Marcus knew he couldn't go public without a solid plan. He called Mr. Johnson, who arrived at Marcus' apartment that afternoon. They spent hours discussing how best to move forward. Marcus couldn't afford to make a mistake. If he misplayed his hand, Hamilton Trust would bury the story, and Sarah's career would be ruined. But if they could get the right people involved, the truth would come out, and Hamilton Trust would have no choice but to face the consequences. "We need media attention, Mr. Johnson said, his voice steady and thoughtful. "The kind that can't be ignored. This isn't just about exposing them, it's about changing the conversation. We need to make sure this story gets in front of the right people." Together, they reached out to Tina Carter, a respected investigative journalist known for her ex-boss on corporate corruption. She was someone who wouldn't back down from a fight, and Marcus knew she was the perfect ally for this battle. When Tina arrived at Marcus' apartment later that week, she listened intently as Marcus and Mr. Johnson laid out the case against Hamilton Trust. Tina's eyes narrowed as she scrolled through the evidence on Marcus' laptop, her expression growing more determined with each passing minute. "This is big," she said finally, looking up at Marcus. "And you're right, this isn't just about the bank. This is about systemic discrimination in the financial world. If we do this right, we can blow the lid off the whole thing." With Tina on board, the plan was set in motion. Over the next few weeks, she worked tirelessly to compile the story, interviewing former clients of Hamilton Trust, uncovering more examples of discrimination, and gathering testimonies that painted a clear picture of the bank's corrupt practices. As the story neared completion, Marcus felt the tension building. He knew that once the story broke, there would be no going back. Hamilton Trust would come after him with everything they had, and the fallout could be massive. But for the first time in months, he didn't feel afraid. He felt ready. The day the story was published, it spread like wildfire. The headline on the news website read, "Exclusive Discrimination and Corruption at Hamilton Trust. Banca Systemic Issue Exposed." Within hours, social media was flooded with outrage. Clients who had experienced similar treatment came forward, sharing their own stories of being denied loans, mistreated, and overlooked. The public outcry was immediate and intense, with demands for Hamilton Trust to be held accountable. Marcus watched the coverage unfold with a mix of pride and disbelief. It was happening. Everything he had fought for, everything Sarah had risked, was finally coming to light. The conversation was shifting, and for the first time, people were talking about the need for real change in the financial system. Hamilton Trust released a statement, denying the allegations and claiming the story was unfounded. But the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. Investigations were launched, and the bank's reputation was in freefall. But it wasn't just about Hamilton Trust anymore. Marcus' story had struck a chord with people across the country. He was inundated with messages from supporters, community leaders, activists, and even politicians who wanted to help him push for reform. His vision for a more inclusive financial system was gaining traction, and Marcus realized that this was his chance to make a real difference. With Hamilton Trust reeling from the scandal, Marcus shifted his focus back to what mattered most, his own investment firm, Empowerment Capital. He wasn't just fighting against something, he was building something new, something better. His phone rang one afternoon, and it was Evelyn Stone. "Marcus," Evelyn began, her voice steady but with a hint of regret. "I've been following what's happening with Hamilton Trust, and I have to say, I was wrong to doubt you. What you're doing is exactly what this industry needs. If you're still looking for investors, I'd like to help." Marcus paused for a moment, processing her words. He hadn't expected Evelyn to reach out after everything that had happened, but her support could be the final piece he needed to launch Empowerment Capital. "I appreciate that, Ms. Stone," Marcus replied. "But if we're going to work together, I need to make sure we're on the same page. This firm isn't just about making money. It's about creating opportunities for people who have been shut out of the system. If you're on board with that, then I'd love to work with you." Evelyn's response was immediate. "That's exactly why I want to be involved, Marcus. Let's make it happen." With Evelyn's backing and the support of other investors who believed in Marcus' vision, Empowerment Capital officially launched a few months later. The firm focused on providing financial opportunities to underrepresented entrepreneurs, those who had been denied loans or investment because they didn't fit the traditional mold. Marcus had built a team that shared his values, and together they were creating a new kind of financial institution, one that prioritized people over profit. The firm's impact was immediate. Empowerment Capital funded dozens of small businesses in its first year, many of which were started by women, people of color, and first-time entrepreneurs. Marcus watched with pride as these businesses grew, knowing that he was helping to change lives in a way that the traditional financial system never could. As Empowerment Capital grew, Marcus' name became synonymous with financial innovation and social justice. The firm's success wasn't just measured in profits, but in the lives it transformed people from underrepresented backgrounds who now had the financial backing to start businesses and lift their communities. The ripple effect of Marcus' triumph extended far beyond his own firm, as Hamilton Trust continued to suffer from the fallout of the scandal. Investigations into the bank's discriminatory practices had revealed a culture of exclusion and favoritism, and the media kept the story alive, putting pressure on regulators and lawmakers to act. Public trust in Hamilton Trust plummeted, and many of its high-profile clients started pulling their accounts. Troy Campbell, who had once reveled in his position of power within the bank, now found himself at the center of the storm. He had been named in several reports as one of the individuals responsible for perpetuating the discriminatory culture at the bank, and internal emails surfaced showing his direct involvement in decisions that hurt minority clients, including Marcus. In the weeks following the scandal, Troy's arrogance crumbled. The smug confidence he had once displayed was replaced by a growing desperation. He tried to distance himself from the accusations, claiming he was just following orders, but the damage was done. Hamilton Trust's leadership, desperate to salvage what remained of their reputation, made an example of Troy. He was fired without severance, and a public statement was issued condemning his actions. Troy's fall from grace was swift and brutal. The man who had once looked down on Marcus as an outsider now found himself on the outside. He applied to other financial institutions, but no one wanted to hire a man with his tainted reputation. The industry had turned its back on him. One evening, months after Troy had been fired, Marcus ran into him unexpectedly. They crossed paths at a small coffee shop near Marcus' office. Troy looked haggard, his once perfectly groomed appearance now disheveled. He was a shadow of the man who had ridiculed Marcus that day at the bank. For a moment, their eyes met, and Marcus could see the flicker of recognition in Troy's gaze. But there was no smugness, no condescension, just a hollow, defeated expression. "Marcus," Troy mumbled, his voice strained. I just wanted to say." But Marcus held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. He wasn't interested in hearing Troy's apology. There was nothing left to say. "I hope you've learned something from all this," Marcus said quietly, "because it's not about winning or losing. It's about treating people with respect, no matter where they come from." Troy nodded, unable to meet Marcus' gaze any longer. He muttered something under his breath and shuffled away, disappearing into the evening crowd. As Marcus watched him go, he felt a sense of closure. He didn't need Troy's apology, and he didn't need to rub his victory in Troy's face. Marcus had built something real, something lasting, while Troy had built his career on arrogance and exclusion. The tables had turned, but Marcus wasn't focused on the past anymore. His eyes were on the future. The Office of Empowerment Capital was buzzing with energy. It had been a year since the firm launched, and already Marcus and his team had made a significant impact. They had funded dozens of small businesses across the country, helping entrepreneurs from marginalized communities gain access to the resources they needed to thrive. Marcus stood in the main office watching as his team worked diligently to review new applications, meet with clients, and plan upcoming investments. The atmosphere was collaborative and vibrant, a stark contrast to the rigid, hierarchical environment he had encountered in places like Hamilton Trust. Here, everyone's voice mattered, and every decision was made with the firm's core mission in mind: to create opportunities for those who had been shut out of the traditional financial system. Marcus smiled as he glanced at the latest report on his desk, a profile of Lena Johnson, one of Empowerment Capital's earliest clients. Lena had grown up in a low-income neighborhood and dreamed of opening a community health center. She had been turned down by several banks, all of which told her that her business idea was too risky. But Empowerment Capital had believed in her vision, and with their backing, Lena had opened her center just a few months ago. It was already making a huge difference in her community, providing affordable health care to families who had previously gone without. Marcus couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride as he read Lena's story. This was exactly why he had started Empowerment Capital: to prove that people like Lena had just as much potential as anyone else, if only they were given the chance. As he leaned back in his chair, a knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Mr. Johnson, his longtime mentor and now a close advisor at the firm. He stepped into the office with a grin. "Looks like things are going pretty well, Mr. Johnson said, glancing around the bustling office. "I always knew you'd get here, Marcus." "Thanks to you," Marcus replied, standing to shake Mr. Johnson's hand. "I wouldn't have made it without your guidance." Mr. Johnson waved the compliment away, but Marcus could see the pride in his eyes. "You had it in you all along. You just needed to believe in yourself." They sat down together, and for a moment they simply enjoyed the quiet satisfaction of seeing a dream realized. Marcus reflected on how far he had come, from the humiliating encounter with Troy at Hamilton Trust to the failed loan application, and finally to building a firm that stood for everything the old system had tried to deny him. "Do you ever think about what could have happened if things had gone differently?" Marcus asked, his voice thoughtful. Mr. Johnson nodded. "Sure, but the important thing is, you didn't let those obstacles stop you. You kept moving forward, and that's what sets you apart." Marcus knew he was right. The setbacks, the prejudice, the doubt had all shaped him into the person he was today. And now, standing at the helm of a firm that was changing lives, he understood that the journey had been worth it. As the conversation turned to plans for Empowerment Capital's future, Marcus felt a renewed sense of excitement. There was still so much work to be done, so many barriers to break down, so many lives to impact. But now, with a solid foundation beneath him, he was ready to take on the next challenge. Months later, Marcus stood outside the towering glass facade of Hamilton Trust Bank, the very place where his journey had begun. He hadn't stepped foot inside since the day he'd confronted Troy. And now, as he looked up at the imposing building, he felt a mixture of emotions. Hamilton Trust was still struggling to recover from the scandal. The investigations had led to a shakeup in leadership, and several of the bank's top executives had been forced to resign. Public trust in the institution was still low, and they had lost a significant number of high-profile clients. But as Marcus stood there, he wasn't thinking about Hamilton Trust's downfall. He was thinking about the future. His future, and the future of people like him who had once been told they didn't belong. He glanced down at his phone and saw a message from Sarah Mitchell. Good News Empowerment Capital was just featured in Forbes. You're officially a trailblazer. Marcus chuckled and texted back, couldn't have done it without you. Sarah had stayed at Hamilton Trust after the scandal, helping to lead the bank's internal reforms. She had played a crucial role in changing the culture from within. And though it was an uphill battle, she was committed to making sure Hamilton Trust became a more inclusive and ethical institution. As Marcus turned away from the bank and walked down the bustling streets of the city, he felt lighter than he had in years. He had come full circle, but he wasn't the same person who had walked into that bank all those years ago. He was no longer defined by the barriers others had put in front of him. Instead, he had built his own path, one that allowed others to rise alongside him. Empowerment Capital was just the beginning. Marcus had plans to expand the firm's reach, to create more opportunities for people across the country. He wanted to inspire others to believe in their potential, just as Mr. Johnson had once believed in his. In the distance, the city skyline shimmered against the setting sun, a symbol of endless possibility. As Marcus walked toward his next meeting, he smiled to himself. He wasn't just breaking the glass ceiling, he was building something entirely new. It had been 2 years since Empowerment Capital launched, and Marcus Wright's vision had grown beyond anything he had imagined. The firm now had offices in 5 major cities across the United States, each staffed with a team of passionate professionals dedicated to providing financial opportunities to underrepresented communities. They had helped fund hundreds of small businesses, restaurants, tech startups, community health centers, and more, each one a testament to the potential that traditional financial institutions had overlooked. The success of Empowerment Capital had drawn national attention. Marcus had been invited to speak at conferences, universities, and even government panels about the importance of financial equity and creating a more inclusive economy. The world was beginning to listen to his message, and more importantly, people were starting to act on it. Other venture capital firms and banks were rethinking their own practices, and there was a growing movement to address the systemic issues in the financial industry. One sunny afternoon, Marcus stood in front of a large crowd gathered in Chicago, where Empowerment Capital was opening its newest office. The event was celebratory, filled with clients, supporters, and local community members. A local band played upbeat music, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. It was the kind of day Marcus had dreamed about during the long nights when he wondered if his vision would ever become a reality. Standing on the stage, Marcus scanned the crowd, recognizing faces of business owners who had benefited from Empowerment Capital's support. Lena Johnson, whose community health center had expanded into a second location, waved from the front row. Monica Rodriguez, the tech entrepreneur he had befriended early on, smiled beside her business partner, knowing they had both played a part in the journey. As Marcus approached the microphone, the crowd quieted, eager to hear from the man who had turned a revolutionary idea into a powerful movement. "Thank you all for being here today," Marcus began, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who had found his purpose. "When we started Empowerment Capital, we set out to change the way people think about finance. We wanted to prove that investing in real people, with real dreams and real potentials, not only the right thing to do, but it's also smart business." He paused, letting his words sink in, the crowd hanging on to each one. "Over the past 2 years, we've seen what can happen when we give people the resources they need to succeed. We've seen businesses grow, communities thrive, and lives transformed. And the most important thing is that this is just the beginning. Applause rippled through the crowd, and Marcus smiled, feeling the energy in the air. It was a far cry from the days when he had stood alone in the lobby of Hamilton Trust Bank, facing down condescension and doubt. He had built something that mattered, something that was making a tangible difference. "But I don't want you to think this is about me," Marcus continued, his tone more serious. "Because it's not. This is about all of us. It's about everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. It's about the entrepreneurs who were told their ideas weren't worth the risk, the communities that were overlooked, the people who were shut out of the financial system because they didn't fit the mold." He could see the impact of his words reflected in the faces of the crowd. This wasn't just another business speech. It was a call to action. "We're changing that narrative," Marcus said, his voice rising with conviction. "And we're doing it together. Empowerment Capital isn't just a firm, it's a movement. And I'm so proud to be standing here today with all of you, knowing that the work we're doing will continue to lift people up for years to come." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Marcus stepped back from the microphone, giving them a moment to celebrate. As the applause swelled around him, he couldn't help but think back to the people who had helped him along the way: Mr. Johnson, Sarah, and even Evelyn Stone, who had taken a chance on him when others had turned their backs. After the event, Marcus wandered through the new office, taking in the bright open space and the excitement of his staff as they prepared for their first day in Chicago. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had fought so hard to get here, and now, looking at the fruits of his labor, it felt surreal. As he stood by the window watching the city below, Sarah walked up beside him. She had flown in from New York for the opening and had been instrumental in helping Empowerment Capital expand into new markets. "You did it, Marcus," she said with a smile, her voice filled with pride. "You've built something incredible." "We did it," Marcus corrected, smiling back at her. "None of this would have happened without you." Sarah shrugged. "I just gave you a little nudge. You're the one who had the vision. And now, you've got an entire movement behind you." Marcus looked out at the cityscape, the skyline stretching out before them. "It still feels like there's so much left to do." "There is," Sarah agreed. "But look how far you've come. And you're not alone anymore." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He wasn't alone. He had built a team, a community, and a network of people who believed in the same things he did. Together, they were changing the financial landscape, one investment at a time. That evening, as Marcus sat in his hotel room reflecting on the day's events, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the White House, an invitation to attend a roundtable discussion on economic equity and inclusive finance. Marcus stared at the message, his heart racing. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of his work, it was a recognition that what he had started was now being seen at the highest levels of government. It was an opportunity to help shape the future of financial policy, to make sure that the changes he had fought for were embedded into the fabric of the system itself. He sat back, letting the significance of the moment wash over him. He had come a long way from that first humiliating encounter with Troy Campbell. The obstacles, the rejections, the betrayals, they had all been part of a journey that had brought him to this point. And yet, as Marcus thought about the future, he knew that his work was far from over. There were still so many people who needed access to the resources that Empowerment Capital provided. There were still systemic barriers to break down, still voices that needed to be heard. But now Marcus was ready. He had the tools, the support, and the vision to keep pushing forward. He wasn't just changing his own life, he was helping to change the lives of countless others. As he looked out at the twinkling lights of the city, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. The fight for equity, for inclusion, for a fair shot at success, this was his legacy. And it was only just beginning. Thank you for joining Marcus Wright's incredible journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring tales of resilience, empowerment, and change, make sure to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future stories. Together, we can continue to explore powerful narratives that inspire, challenge, and uplift. Let's keep building a community of change. See you in the next video. As Daniel and Sophia left the Harper estate that night, hand in hand, they knew that this was a turning point. They had faced so many obstacles, both external and internal. Now, with Robert's reluctant acceptance, they could finally begin to build the future they had always dreamed of. Months passed, and the town of Greenwood began to see Daniel and Sophia in a new light. Their resilience, their determination to be together despite the odds, had earned them the respect of many who had once judged them. Slowly, the whispers and stares faded, replaced by nods of acknowledgement and even smiles of approval. As the summer approached, Daniel and Sophia decided that it was time to take the next step in their relationship. After everything they had been through, they knew that they didn't want to wait any longer to begin their life together as husband and wife. One warm evening in late June, Daniel proposed to Sophia in the same place where they had first reconnected, the town's little park by the river. It was simple and intimate, just the two of them under the stars, with Daniel down on one knee and Sophia's heart racing as she said yes through happy tears. They decided to keep the wedding small, inviting only close friends and family. It wasn't about impressing the town or proving anything to anyone. It was about celebrating the love that had carried them through the hardest times of their lives. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the sunlight casting a golden glow over the town. The ceremony was held in the very church that had once been a source of tension for Sophia and her family. But now it felt like a place of peace and new beginnings. Sophia stood at the back of the church, her heart fluttering as she looked down the aisle at Daniel, who was waiting for her with a smile that made her feel like the most loved woman in the world. Madison stood beside her, beaming with pride, while Connor and the younger children fidgeted excitedly in their seats. As the music began to play and Sophia started her walk down the aisle, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This moment, this beautiful, perfect moment, was the culmination of everything they had fought for. It was a testament to the strength of their love and the power of their commitment to each other. When she reached Daniel, he took her hands in his eyes filled with love and admiration. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia smiled, her heart overflowing with happiness. "You don't look too bad yourself." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, with Margaret reading a passage about love and unity, and Madison stepping up to give a short, tearful speech about how much Daniel meant to their family. "I used to think we didn't need anyone," Madison said, her voice shaking with emotion. "But Daniel showed me that it's okay to let people in. He's been there for us in ways I never thought anyone could, and I'm so grateful he's a part of our family now." There wasn't a dry eye in the church as Madison finished her speech, and even Robert, sitting in the front pew, looked on with a softness in his eyes that no one had ever seen before. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel and Sophia shared a kiss that felt like a promise that would carry them through whatever challenges the future might bring. The reception was held at the town's park, with twinkling lights hanging from the trees and a live band playing in the background. It was a celebration of love, family, and community. And for the first time, Daniel and Sophia felt truly at home in Greenwood. As the night wore on, the laughter and music filled the air, and Daniel and Sophia danced under the stars, their arms wrapped around each other, their hearts full. "I can't believe we're here," Sophia whispered, her head resting on Daniel's shoulder. "After everything, we made it." Daniel smiled, pulling her closer. "We did, and I wouldn't have it any other way." As they swayed to the music, surrounded by the people they loved, Daniel and Sophia knew that their journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still moments of doubt and hardship, but they also knew that they had something unshakable, something that could weather any storm. They had love, and that, they realized, was more than enough. Daniel and Sophia's journey had been one of struggle, heartbreak, and resilience. They had faced judgment, rejection, and the weight of their pasts, but through it all, they had discovered the true strength of their love. In the end, it wasn't the opinions of others or the approval of society that defined their happiness, it was their unwavering belief in each other. with their family by their side and a future filled with hope and possibility. Daniel and Sophia stepped into the next chapter of their lives together, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, because they knew, without a doubt, that love would always guide them home. A year after their wedding, Daniel and Sophia sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange and pink. The cool evening breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, and the sounds of their children laughing in the yard filled the air with joy. It had been a whirlwind of a year, filled with new challenges and new joys. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable and right. Daniel continued his work at the clinic, while Sophia had become an integral part of the bakery's success, eventually becoming co-owner with Mrs. Bell. Their family had grown even closer, with Madison and Connor thriving in school and their younger siblings finding their own ways to shine. Despite the difficulties they had faced early on in Greenwood, Daniel and Sophia had found a place in the town that they now proudly called home. The community, which had once seemed hesitant and divided, had gradually opened up to them. Friendships deepened, and the once cold stares from some of the townspeople had softened into warm smiles and greetings. Sophia leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "Can you believe it's been a year since the wedding?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. Daniel smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and other times it feels like we've been together forever." Sophia chuckled softly. "Forever sounds good." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the children played a game of tag under the fading light. Madison was laughing, chasing after Connor, while their younger siblings squealed in delight as they darted around the yard. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Daniel mused, his eyes soft as he watched the scene before him. "How far we've come." Sophia nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "I never thought we'd get here, but now that we have, I can't imagine life any other way." The journey had been anything but easy, but the struggles they had faced had made their love and their family stronger. Sophia had learned to let go of the fear that had once held her back, while Daniel had found the courage to stand up for what mattered most to him. Together, they had built a life that was rooted in love, trust, and a sense of belonging. "I was thinking," Daniel said, breaking the silence, "maybe it's time we start planning that family trip we've been talking about." Sophia raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, and where exactly are we going?" Daniel shrugged, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "I don't know. Somewhere fun. Somewhere we can make new memories." Sophia laughed, her heart light. "I like the sound of that." They had always talked about taking a big family vacation, something to celebrate the life they had built together. And now, with the weight of their past struggles behind them, it felt like the perfect time to start dreaming of new adventures. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the town of Greenwood, Sophia couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since she and Daniel had first met. She had been so afraid of opening her heart again, of letting someone in after years of guarding herself. But Daniel had shown her that love was worth the risk, and that true happiness came from being willing to embrace life flaws, challenges, and all. And now, as she sat beside the man she loved, surrounded by the laughter of their children, Sophia knew that she had found something rare and precious. She had found a love that endured. "Hey," Daniel said softly, his voice drawing her out of her thoughts. "I love you." Sophia smiled, turning to look at him, her eyes shining with affection. "I love you too." They shared a kiss, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. It wasn't just a kiss of passion or romance, it was a promise. A promise that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, just as they always had. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the children eventually tired out from their game of tag, collapsing onto the grass in fits of giggles. Daniel and Sophia stood up from the porch, walking over to gather their little ones, who were now sleepy-eyed and ready for bed. "Come on, you rascals," Daniel teased, scooping up the youngest in his arms. "Time to get ready for bed." Madison and Connor groaned playfully, but there were no real complaints. They followed their parents inside, their hearts full after a day well spent. Later that night, after tucking the kids in and settling into bed themselves, Daniel and Sophia lay side by side, their hands intertwined as they stared up at the ceiling. "You know," Daniel said after a long moment, "I never really thanked you." Sophia turned to him, a curious smile on her face. "For what?" "For giving us a chance," Daniel replied, his voice sincere. "For believing in us, even when it was hard." Sophia's heart warmed at his words. "You don't have to thank me, Daniel. We both fought for this." He smiled, leaning over to kiss her softly. "I know, but I just wanted you to know how grateful I am." Sophia kissed him back, her heart swelling with love. "And I'm grateful for you. Every single day." As they drifted off to sleep, their hands still clasped together, Sophia couldn't help but think about the future. There would be new challenges, new adventures, and new joys. But as long as they had each other, she knew they could handle anything. Because in the end, love was what truly mattered. It was what had brought them together, and it was what would carry them forward into a future that was as bright and beautiful as the stars above. As Daniel and Sophia's story ends, remember that love, resilience, and the power of family can help us overcome even the toughest challenges. If you've enjoyed following their journey and want more heartwarming stories filled with love, hope, and inspiration, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Your support means the world. Well, see you in the next story. The school's Diversity and Inclusion Office, created in the wake of the lawsuit, became a central hub for student-led initiatives aimed at promoting equity and addressing bias. One of the first major changes was the formation of a student advisory board, which included representatives from different racial, cultural, and socio-economic backgrounds. Jasmine and Chloe were invited to join the board, and while they were initially hesitant, they saw it as an opportunity to help shape the future of Brookwood. The first meeting of the advisory board was filled with nervous energy as students from different grades and backgrounds gathered to discuss their visions for the school. Jasmine, who had always been more outspoken, took the lead, while Chloe offered her quiet but insightful input. "We need to make sure that the changes we're making aren't just on paper," Jasmine said during the meeting. "It's not enough to change the admissions process. We need to change the way people think. We need to create a culture where everyone feels like they belong, no matter who they are." The other students nodded in agreement, and soon the conversation flowed freely, with ideas for workshops, cultural events, and mentorship programs aimed at fostering understanding and unity within the student body. Under Emily's leadership, Brookwood also began reaching out to communities that had been historically underrepresented at the school. They partnered with local organizations to recruit students from diverse backgrounds and provided scholarships to ensure that financial barriers wouldn't prevent deserving students from attending. Emily herself worked tirelessly to rebuild trust within the Brookwood community. She held regular town hall meetings with parents and faculty, where she addressed concerns and shared updates on the school's progress. She made it clear that Brookwood was committed to becoming a leader in educational equity. And while some parents remained resistant, the majority embraced the changes. One afternoon, as Jasmine and Chloe were leaving school, they stopped to talk with Emily, who was walking across the campus. "You've both done so much to help make these changes happen," Emily said, her voice warm with admiration. "Brookwood is better because of you." Jasmine smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "It wasn't just us. A lot of people fought to make this happen." "True," Emily replied, "but you were the spark that ignited the change." As Jasmine and Chloe walked away, they reflected on how far they had come. They had once felt like outsiders, unsure of their place at Brookwood, but now they were part of something much bigger, a movement toward a more just and inclusive future. While Brookwood Academy was undergoing a transformation, the Carter family was focused on rebuilding trust, both within their own family and in the community. The emotional toll of the lawsuit and the public scrutiny had been immense, but now that the battle was behind them, they were beginning to heal. Ethan and Vanessa, who had always been a strong team, took time to reconnect with each other and with their daughters. They made a conscious effort to spend more time together as a family, away from the pressures of their respective careers. Weekend trips, family dinners, and quiet evenings at home became a regular part of their routine. For Jasmine and Chloe, the process of rebuilding trust within themselves was more personal. The past year had tested their resilience, but it had also taught them important lessons about their own strength and the power of their voices. Jasmine, who had always felt the need to prove herself academically, began to let go of the idea that her worth was tied to her achievements. She realized that her place at Brookwood wasn't something she had to justify, it was something she had earned. She also started to explore her interests outside of academics, joining the school's debate team and getting involved in student government. Chloe, who had struggled with anxiety and self-doubt, found solace in her art. She began to use her creativity as an outlet for her emotions, expressing through painting and drawing what she couldn't always put into words. Her art teacher noticed her talent and encouraged her to showcase her work in the school's annual art exhibit. "I didn't think anyone would want to see my stuff," Chloe admitted one afternoon as she showed her parents one of her latest paintings. Vanessa smiled, admiring the vibrant colors and intricate details of Chloe's work. "Your art is beautiful, Chloe. You have a gift, and the world deserves to see it." With her parents' encouragement, Chloe agreed to submit her work to the exhibit. On the day of the event, as students and parents wandered through the gallery, Chloe watched nervously from the sidelines, unsure of how her art would be received. But as people stopped to admire her paintings, offering compliments, and asking about her process, she felt a sense of validation she hadn't expected. One of the visitors to the exhibit was Professor Reynolds, the board member who had supported the changes at Brookwood. He paused in front of one of Chloe's paintings, studying it carefully. "This is remarkable," he said, turning to Chloe with a smile. "You have a real talent." Chloe blushed, feeling both proud and shy at the same time. "Thank you. It means a lot." As the evening went on, Chloe realized that she had found her place not just as a student at Brookwood, but as an artist with a voice of her own. The Carter family had been through a storm, but they had come out stronger on the other side. With the lawsuit behind them and Brookwood Academy on a new path, they were ready to focus on what mattered most to each other. One summer evening, the family gathered in their backyard for a barbecue, a tradition they had started before the chaos of the lawsuit had consumed their lives. The smell of grilled food filled the air as they laughed and talked, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. Jasmine and Chloe sat on the patio, reminiscing about their first day at Brookwood and how much had changed since then. "I never thought we'd get through all of that," Jasmine said, sipping lemonade. "But here we are." Chloe nodded, her eyes softening. "I'm glad we didn't give up. It was hard, but we made it." Ethan joined them, holding a plate of burgers and hot dogs. He smiled at his daughters, pride radiating from him. "You two are the strongest people I know. You fought for what was right, and you made a difference." Vanessa, carrying a bowl of salad, sat down beside Ethan. She placed a hand on his arm, her expression filled with love and gratitude. "We all made a difference, and we did it together." As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the backyard, the Carters sat around the table eating and laughing. The weight of the past year finally lifted. They knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. That night, as Jasmine and Chloe sat outside, looking up at the stars, they reflected on how far they had come. They had been tested in ways they never could have imagined, but they had emerged stronger, more confident, and more certain of their place in the world. "I think we're going to be okay," Chloe said softly, her gaze fixed on the sky. Jasmine smiled, her heart full. "Yeah, we're going to be just fine." Months after the lawsuit had ended, the Carter family continued to move forward, both personally and professionally. Ethan's proposed bill on educational reform was gaining momentum in Congress, with support from lawmakers across the political spectrum. The bill aimed to establish nationwide guidelines for private school admissions, ensuring that no student would be discriminated against based on race, socioeconomic status, or background. On the day of the vote, Ethan stood in the Senate chamber, addressing his colleagues with the same passion that had driven him throughout the Brookwood case. "This bill is about fairness," he said, his voice steady but powerful. It's about giving every child a fair shot at success. It's about ensuring that no student is ever told they don't belong because of the color of their skin. We've come a long way, but we still have work to do. And it starts here, with this bill. As the vote was cast, the bill passed with overwhelming support, marking a major victory in the fight for educational equity. Ethan, standing in the Senate chamber, allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. The fight was far from over, but this was a step in the right direction. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued to work on cases related to racial discrimination, using her platform to advocate for families facing similar challenges. She became a mentor to young lawyers, sharing her knowledge and experience to help them navigate the complexities of civil rights law. For Jasmine and Chloe, life at Brookwood had settled into a new normal. They continued to thrive academically, but they also made time for the things they loved: debating, painting, and building friendships with students from all walks of life. One afternoon, as the sisters sat in the school library, Chloe looked up from her sketchbook and smiled at Jasmine. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't fought back?" Chloe asked. Jasmine thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I don't like to think about that. What matters is that we did fight. And because of that, everything changed." Chloe nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "We should be proud of that." "We are," Jasmine said, her voice filled with certainty. "We made a difference." As the sisters packed up their things and headed out of the library, they knew that their fight had been worth it. They had faced adversity and come out stronger, and they had helped pave the way for a future where every student, regardless of race or background, could walk through the doors of opportunity with their head held high. The road ahead was long, but the Carters were ready for it. Thank you so much for following the Carter family's journey to justice and equality. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about powerful narratives that challenge society, inspire change, and explore the human experience, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss out on new content. Together, we can continue to share stories that matter. See you in the next one. The police are on their way, Derek. You've lost. Derek's eyes darted around, realizing for the first time that the entire street was watching him. His bravado faltered, his shoulders tensing as he took in the growing crowd of neighbors, all standing together in a show of solidarity. For a moment, it seemed like Derek might lash out, might do something reckless. But then slowly, the fight drained out of him. His fists unclenched, his shoulders slumped, and with one last look at Edith filled with hatred and resentment, he turned and stormed back to his car. The street was silent as Derek sped away, his tires screeching against the pavement. Edith's breath came in shallow gasps, her heart still racing from the confrontation. She stood there for a moment, frozen, until Bill crossed the street and stood beside her. "You okay, Edith?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Edith nodded, though her legs still felt shaky. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to all of you." Bill smiled warmly, giving her a reassuring nod. "We're not going to let him hurt you, Edith. Not now, not ever." Edith's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of gratitude. She had been afraid for so long, but now, standing here with her neighbors by her side, she felt a renewed sense of strength. She wasn't alone. In the days following the final confrontation with Derek, the neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the sense of fear that had once gripped Cedar Street began to dissipate. Derek hadn't returned, and Edith had received word from the police that he was being closely monitored. They had issued a restraining order, preventing Derek from coming within a certain distance of Edith's home or the shelter where Rachel and the girls were staying. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough to give Edith peace of mind for now. Rachel called regularly, checking in to see how Edith was doing and updating her on their progress. The shelter had helped her find legal representation, and she was working towards securing full custody of the girls and filing for divorce from Derek. It was a long, difficult road, but Rachel was determined to keep moving forward. "The girls are adjusting," Rachel said during one phone call, her voice sounding stronger, more confident. "They're starting to sleep better, and we're getting used to our new routine. It's still hard sometimes, but I feel like we're finally free." Edith smiled, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel. She had come so far, and though there were still challenges ahead, Edith knew that Rachel had the strength to face them. "I'm so proud of you," Edith said softly. "You're doing such a good job, Rachel. You and the girls are going to be just fine." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then her voice softened. "We couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You saved us. I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done." Tears welled in Edith's eyes, and she wiped them away with a smile. "You're family now, Rachel, and family takes care of each other." As Edith hung up the phone, a sense of calm settled over her. She had faced her fears, stood up to Derek, and helped Rachel and the girls escape a dangerous situation. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Her home, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a symbol of strength and resilience. And her neighbor's son, strangers, had become a community, united by a shared sense of purpose. Life on Cedar Street would never be the same again, but that was okay. Because now it is filled with hope, connection, and the promise of a better future. Edith smiled as she stepped out into her garden, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the roses. She knelt down, her hands gently tending to the flowers, feeling the cool earth beneath her fingertips. There was still work to be done, but now she knew she wasn't doing it alone. In the weeks that followed Derek's final confrontation, a new sense of peace settled over Cedar Street. The neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the need for constant worry had lessened as Derek's presence faded from their lives. He hadn't returned, and the restraining order kept him at a safe distance from Edith's home and from the shelter where Rachel and the girls were living. Edith found herself breathing easier with each passing day, the weight of fear slowly lifting from her shoulders. One crisp autumn morning, as Edith was pruning her roses, she heard the familiar ring of her phone from inside the house. She wiped her hands on her gardening apron and hurried to answer it, her heart lifting when she saw Rachel's name on the caller ID. "Rachel, it's so good to hear from you," Edith said, a smile spreading across her face as she held the phone to her ear. "Hi, Edith," Rachel replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, dear. Just tending to the garden. How are you and the girls doing?" Rachel let out a small sigh, though it was one of relief rather than stress. "We're doing really well, actually. The girls are starting to settle in at school, and they're making new friends. We've been staying at the shelter for a while now, but I've been working with a caseworker. And, well, we found a place. It's a small apartment, but it's ours." Edith's heart swelled with joy at the news. "Rachel, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I couldn't have done it without your help, Edith. Really, I mean it. You were there for me when I didn't know what to do. I'll never be able to thank you enough." "You've already thanked me more than enough, Rachel," Edith said gently. "I'm just glad you and the girls are safe and moving forward." "We are," Rachel agreed, her voice steady. "We still have some hard days, but we're starting to rebuild. I'm learning how to live without looking over my shoulder all the time. The girls, they've been through so much, but I think they're going to be okay." Edith felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she wiped it away with a smile. "You're an incredible mother, Rachel. You've given them the chance to have a better life, and that's the most important thing." "Thank you," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I wanted to ask, would you like to come visit us when we're settled into the apartment? The girls miss you, and I'd love for you to see our new place." "I'd love that," Edith replied without hesitation. "I can't wait to see how far you've come." After they said their goodbyes, Edith stood in the quiet of her kitchen, a deep sense of pride and peace settling over her. She had been part of something important, helping Rachel and her daughters escape a dangerous situation and start a new life. Knowing that they were safe and thriving gave Edith a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. But Edith also knew that healing wasn't just for Rachel and the girls. She too had been deeply affected by everything that had happened. For so long, Edith had lived in a world of solitude, wrapped in the memories of her past life with Richard. But now she realized that she had the power to create new connections, to make a difference in the lives of others. Her small, quiet world had expanded in ways she never could have predicted. A few weeks later, Edith stood in front of the door to Rachel's new apartment, her heart racing with anticipation. She held a basket filled with homemade cookies and a small potted plant, a housewarming gift for Rachel and the girls. As she knocked on the door, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and pride. Rachel had taken such brave steps toward building a new life for herself and her daughters, and Edith was eager to see the progress they had made. The door opened, and there stood Rachel, her face lighting up with a wide smile. "Edith, you made it." "Of course I did," Edith replied warmly, stepping inside and hugging Rachel. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The apartment was small but cozy, filled with the warmth and light that Edith had come to associate with Rachel. The walls were adorned with colorful artwork, some drawn by Lily and Ivy, and the space felt alive with the energy of a family building something new. Edith smiled as she took it all in, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel's resilience. "Look who's here!" Rachel called out. And moments later, Lily and Ivy came bounding into the room, their faces bright with excitement. "Grandma Edith!" they exclaimed in unison, rushing toward her and wrapping their arms around her. Edith laughed, bending down to hug the girls. "Oh, my dears, it's so good to see you." "We missed you," Ivy said, her voice small but filled with warmth. "Can you stay for dinner?" "I wouldn't dream of leaving before dinner," Edith replied, her heart swelling with affection for the girls. As they settled into the living room, Rachel brought out a pot of tea, and the four of them spent the afternoon catching up, laughing, and sharing stories. The girls proudly showed Edith their artwork, and Rachel talked about how they were adjusting to their new school and making friends. "They're doing so well," Rachel said, her voice filled with relief and pride. "I wasn't sure how they would handle all the changes, but they've been so strong. I'm so proud of them." "You should be proud of yourself too," Edith said gently. "You've created a safe, loving home for them. That's everything." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. "I still can't believe we made it. There were times when I thought we'd never get out, but now we have a chance at a real life." As the afternoon turned into evening, the conversation grew deeper, and Edith and Rachel found themselves reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. There had been so much pain, fear, and uncertainty, but now there was also hope. They had made it through the storm, and now they were standing on the other side, ready to rebuild their lives. "I never thought I'd feel free," Rachel admitted quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. "But now I wake up every morning knowing that I'm safe, that my girls are safe. And that's everything." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "You deserve this peace, Rachel. You and the girls deserve all the happiness in the world." Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And you deserve it too, Edith. You've been through so much yourself. You've given us a new start, and I hope you know how much that means to me." Edith smiled, her heart full. "We've given each other a new start." Later that evening, after dinner, and one last round of hugs from Lily and Ivy, Edith said her goodbyes and made her way back to her own home. As she walked down the quiet street, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had changed in ways she never could have predicted, but it was better now, richer, fuller, and filled with new connections. Rachel and the girls had become like family to her, and Edith knew that their bond would only grow stronger as they continued to support one another in the days ahead. As the autumn leaves began to fall and the air turned crisp, Edith found herself spending more time in her garden, reflecting on the past few months. So much had changed, not just for Rachel and the girls, but for Edith as well. Her life, once quiet and isolated, had been transformed by the relationships she had built and the strength she had discovered within herself. But with that transformation came a deeper understanding of the weight she had been carrying for so long: grief, the loneliness, the sense of being left behind. Richard's death had left a hole in Edith's life, one that she had tried to fill with routine and solitude. But now, with Rachel and the girls in her life, Edith realized that she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. One afternoon, as Edith sat in the garden with a cup of tea, she found herself thinking about Richard. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his warmth, the way he had always made her feel safe and loved. But for the first time in a long time, Edith felt a sense of peace when she thought of him, peace in knowing that he would have been proud of her for everything she had done to help Rachel and the girls. As she sipped her tea, Edith decided it was time to visit Richard's grave. She hadn't been in a while, and she felt a strong pull to go to tell him about everything that had happened, about the new life she had found after all these years. The next day, Edith drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. The drive was quiet, the fall colors painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. When she arrived, Edith made her way to Richard's headstone, a small smile on her face as she placed a bouquet of fresh roses at his grave. "Hello, love," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. "It's been a while, but I've been busy. I have so much to tell you." For the next hour, Edith sat by Richard's grave, telling him about Rachel, about the girls, about everything that had happened since they had moved into the neighborhood. She talked about how she had found new strength within herself, how she had made new friends, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a difference in someone's life. "I think you'd be proud of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've still got a lot of life left to live, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'll carry your love with me, always." As Edith stood to leave, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Richard was still with her, in spirit, and that his love would continue to guide her in the days ahead. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. As the winter holidays approached, Cedar Street came alive with the warm glow of twinkling lights and the festive spirit of the season. Edith, who had once dreaded the long, lonely winter months, now found herself filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. The neighborhood had changed so much in the past few months, and Edith felt more connected to her community than ever before. Rachel and the girls had invited Edith to spend Christmas with them in their new apartment, and Edith had gladly accepted. It was a far cry from the quiet, solitary holidays she had spent in years past, and she was looking forward to celebrating with people she cared about. On Christmas Eve, Edith arrived at Rachel's apartment with a basket full of gifts and homemade treats. The girls greeted her at the door, their faces bright with excitement, and Edith couldn't help but laugh as they pulled her inside. "We've been waiting for you," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Mom made hot chocolate. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she followed the girls into the cozy living room where Rachel was waiting with a warm smile. The apartment was decorated with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine. "Welcome, Edith," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Edith replied, her voice full of warmth. As they sat together by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and exchanging stories, Edith felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing for so long, a sense of connection, of belonging, of family. The evening passed in a blur of laughter, conversation, and warmth. The girls opened their presents with wide-eyed excitement, and Edith marveled at how far they had come since the dark days of living under Derek's control. They were happy, healthy, and full of life, and Edith knew that Rachel had done an incredible job of creating a safe, loving home for them. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rachel and Edith sat together by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said quietly, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it out." "But we did." "You did," Edith corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, and now you and the girls have a bright future ahead of you." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You were there when I needed someone the most, and I'll never forget that." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've been there for each other, and we'll keep being there, no matter what comes next." As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Edith felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The storm was over, and now it was time to move forward to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that they had all found the strength to survive and thrive. And in that moment, Edith knew that everything would be all right. Thank you for following along with Edith's emotional and inspiring journey. If you found this story moving or relatable, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We'll be bringing you more heartwarming tales of resilience, community, and the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new content is available. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.